Well, good
Okay.
morning. Um, my name is Jamie Sleen. I'm the Vice President of Government Affairs and Economic Development for the Fox Cities Chamber. I am joined right now with Congressman Glenn Grothman and Robin Gruner from AT&T. We're so excited to have this first of our four-part public policy series, and this one is a federal legislative update. And we have members from our federal delegation, including Congressman Grothman, Congressman Gallagher, and Senator Baldwin. But I'll kick it over to Robin. Thank you, Robin, so much for your time and your sponsorship of this event. And let's get into our discussion.
Good morning. Thank you, Jamie. I'm Robin Gruner, Director of External Affairs for AT&T Wisconsin, and we're very proud to continue supporting the Chamber and support these public policy events to bring messages and information to our members. So thank you, Jamie. With us this morning, we'll kick it off right away. Our first guest is Congressman Glenn Grothman. He represents the 6th Congressional District. He is currently serving his 3rd term in Congress, having been elected in 2014. He currently serves on 2 committees, the House and Education and Labor Committee and the Committee on Oversight and Reform. Before serving in Congress, Congressman Grothman, as you may recall, served as the Assistant Majority Leader in the Wisconsin State Senate. And we're going to just go ahead and kick it off right to you, Congressman Grothman. Thank you very much for being here this morning. If you want to maybe kick things off and give us a little bit of a rundown of some of the stuff that's been happening in DC. It sounds like you're there today.
Sure. I flew out last night. So a big day today. I recently picked up a 3rd committee. I'm on the Budget Committee, and we will vote that stimulus bill out of the Budget Committee today, I assume on a party line basis. I'll talk about that a little bit, and then I'll talk in general about kind of the attitude up here after the events of the last month. Today, that bill is a $1.9 trillion bill. I don't think the press has done a good job on focusing exactly the size of that bill or how much $1.9 trillion is. We have a growing problem in this country in that the monetary supply is growing. And as the monetary supply grows at kind of unprecedented rates, as the Federal Reserve prints money, we're seeing inflation happen. That's not the sole reason for inflation, but you notice housing prices are up, the price of gas is up, the price of food is up, and that's before we spend another $1.9 trillion. I will point out that Congress has already appropriated almost $1 trillion in past bills that hasn't been spent yet. So I'm not sure that this amount is necessary. A lot of this money is going to counties and cities. I personally talked to a mayor who feels that because of the COVID, he's out a little bit more than $1 million. Under this bill, he's getting over $20 million. I talked to a county executive in the same situation. He felt he had lost under $1 million because of the COVID. He is also getting about $20 million in this bill. That gives you an idea of the recklessness of the people who are passing it. I think on a state level, we in the relatively recent past found out they were getting in over $1 billion more in income and sales tax than originally anticipated. Obviously, if the state is getting $1 billion, should we be printing more money now? I don't think so. There's one other provision in there, in addition to the overall high spending and increase in the money supply I want to bring up, that's important for people in your area. I don't know if your folks know what a sheltered workshop is. That's a place where people of different abilities, maybe Down syndrome, maybe spina bifida, where they work. Historically, these folks have worked for under minimum wage because it's difficult for them compared to people of other abilities. Nevertheless, if you tour these places, and I think in my area, you're talking about something like Lakeside Packaging in Oshkosh or Brook Industries in Fond du Lac. If you tour these, they make you feel very good because you have people working there who've been dealt a tough lot in life. But despite that, they work hard. They're able to make some money to supplement the governmental assistance they have otherwise. They don't use these checks to pay the rent or, to pay the mortgage, because they are getting other subsidies or frequently don't. But these jobs are so important for these folks. And in the minimum wage part that's received some publicity in this bill, they're getting rid of what they call the 14C certificates. In other words, they're getting rid of the ability for places like this to pay people under minimum wage, which is important if you're going to hire them. I'm going to emphasize that these jobs are so important for these folks' self-esteem. They're so important for socialization, because otherwise a lot of these people wouldn't get out and meet people other than their parents or immediate family members. So that's something I want to highlight and hasn't really been talked about enough. A lot has been said lately about how people are getting along in Congress and what it's like here. And of course, I think they're talking about the events of January 6th. The congressmen, as far as I can see, are getting along relatively well. Obviously, I have problems with the bill today. I'm not going to vote to spend $1.9 trillion. But on a personal level, I get along with my Democrat colleagues. I'm working on them working with them on other bills that we're going to get around to later. You know, people are able to get along on a day-to-day basis. We still have all this fencing and wire around the Capitol, which is quite frankly absurd. I think anybody up here felt that the Capitol Police had regained control of the Capitol even by 9 o'clock at night on the 6th. The idea that we have National Guardsmen here 6 weeks later is absurd. I don't know whether people are trying to make a statement and try to exaggerate the significance of the riots, or whether people are really still afraid, which I don't know what you would be afraid of. I mean, the town is almost like a ghost town because of the COVID, but it is embarrassing right now to have all this fencing around the Capitol, and I wish they would take it down. As far as other things that we're working on here, as I mentioned, I've now got 3 committees. On the Education Committee, there are some things that I think we can get done. I have long been an advocate for allowing refinancing of student loan debt. Usually that's been more of a Democrat thing than a Republican thing. So hopefully there is some chance of getting that through Congress. And something I also push is skills-based education. We have far too many people winding up deeply in debt, graduating from college and maybe not necessarily getting a job. I think more money should be focused on skills-based education. I'm trying to do that in this COVID bill. I think particularly the fields of construction, the medical field, and manufacturing all have big shortages of people with skills. As a matter of fact, one of the areas we're seeing inflation is in housing. And one of the reasons the price of housing is going up is because they can't find anybody to build the houses. So if you know somebody who wants to make sure they have a job for life, get involved in the construction field. With regard to the labor there, one of the things I disagree strongly with President Biden on, he has made such a big deal out of claiming America as a horrible racist country. And I'm going to fight trying to do more there. I know in his inaugural speech, he mentioned racism or white supremacists 5 times. I mean, insofar as he had a theme, the theme was let's fight racism. I just don't see it here. But I know he's come up with executive orders in which there's going to be a lot more paperwork for business, a lot more emphasis on, I just can't look and hire the best person I can. We're going to focus on gender, focus on race, or how many people from this group or how many people of that group. I think it's divisive. I think it's expensive. And I think we've got to do a better job, particularly educating our young people, that we do not have a big racist problem in this country. I mean, all you have to do is look around, see people coming here from all around the world. Wherever you go, Fond du Lac, Oshkosh, Nina, you find people from India, Pakistan, Philippines, Laos, Middle East, Latin America, all living the American dream. And you hear Joe Biden talk, and, it's like, it's always Selma, Alabama in 1955. I mean, it's just an embarrassment that I do intend to push back on that. With regard to the Government Oversight Committee that I'm on, We hopefully will be spending more time looking at the border there, and I'm on a subcommittee that deals with Homeland Security and the border. I went down to the border one more time about 3 weeks ago. I saw the wall insofar as it's being built. Where it was built, it's effective. It's about a 30-foot high wall that goes 8 feet underground. I have yet to meet a Border Patrol agent who didn't think it was a good idea. We had decreased, in part because of the wall, but in part because of our good relationship with Mexico. We decreased the number of people who we were letting in here every month that we didn't want to let in from 100,000 down to 10,000. So we've done a great job there. Another thing I disagree with President Biden on, President Trump had arranged something with the Mexican government where they were holding people on the Mexican side of the border pending a determination whether they have the right to come here. President Biden wants to go back to the days, and rather than holding people on the south of the border, he is going to let them go somewhere in the United States and hope they show up for a hearing maybe a year from now or whatever. In the past, people don't show up for a hearing. It's something that is going to be inducement to have more people come here, which I'm not sure we want. One of the groups that publicizes when President Biden says more illegal immigrant favored things is the cartels. And one of the things you learn at the border is a lot of this traffic is being driven by the cartels. They will charge about $3,000 for a Mexican to come here, about $5,000 for a Central American, $8,000 to $10,000 for a Brazilian, and as much as $20,000 for an Asian to come here. So it's a very difficult thing, but it's very lucrative for the drug cartels. You don't come in this country across that border without them signing off and letting you come in. And that's an unfortunate thing. The other thing to remember about the border is the number of people who are dying there. We had an unusually hot summer last year, and I visited the Tucson sector. In the Tucson sector alone, they found over 100 dead bodies of people who died for dehydration. I don't think that's been publicized as much as it should be either, but to continue on with a system in which we don't really tighten the border is kind of a humanitarian crisis as well. So other bills that I'm working on, I am going to try to somewhere in one of these bills change the way we calculate the taxes on what we call carried interest for hedge fund managers. Some of the wealthiest people in our country are paying taxes less than the working people, which is ridiculous. President Trump promised to do something. He didn't push as hard as he should have, but maybe now that the Democrats are in control, I'll be able to do something there. I am also working on what they call biosimilars, which are cheaper substitutes for people who need insulin. I am fighting the drug companies there. And one of the frustrating things about Washington is far more than in Madison, money talks. But we are so clearly on the side of the angels, it would be nice if we could help out people who have diabetes. Depending upon the type of insurance you have, you still may be paying $500 a month or $1,000 a month for insulin. It would be nice if we could lower that. That's something that I'm working on. I'm also working on helping people who flew Air America during the Vietnam War. That was a CIA operation. The people did drops of supplies to people in Laos. A lot of them died. It was a very risky thing to do, but they haven't been recognized because it was a secret mission. So we're going to try to help people in that regard as well. And finally, I am trying to get some legislation forcing the CDC to publicize the benefits of vitamin D. We're making progress on the virus, but I talk to experts in the field who feel that over 40% of Americans are vitamin D deficient. And if you would get them up to where they should be, you could reduce the number of fatalities, even before we talk about the vaccines, by over 50%. I don't know why CDC has not publicized that. Anthony Fauci has admitted that he uses vitamin D himself, though about 2 months or 3 months into the pandemic, he cautioned against using vitamin D. Well, particularly in Wisconsin with the overcast winters. We have shortages of vitamin D. I encourage anybody on their computer today to take vitamin D. And like I said, I have talked to experts. You could have over a 50% drop in fatalities if they had publicized that. I think as much as they publicize masks and social distancing. Not that that's bad, but it can save a lot of money, save a lot of lives. Okay, I guess we're over halfway into the program here, so why don't I open things up for questions?
Thank you, Congressman. That is quite an array of topics, so thank you very much for your summary. If anybody on the call does have questions, all participants have been muted, but you can put a question in the chat area. So if you do have a question, please feel free to ask it in the chat area. If we don't get to all the questions, Jamie, is it fair to say that we'll be able to follow up with our speakers and maybe send an email out with some of those responses?
Absolutely. Yeah, we will continue this conversation long after today's webinar.
Great. Congressman, one of the questions that we had prepared in advance of today is, as it relates to minimum wage, you mentioned, as you were talking about the 14C certificates, you mentioned minimum wages. And obviously one of the hot topics in DC has been increasing the minimum wage to $15 an hour. What are your thoughts on that and the minimum wage topic overall?
Well, obviously, if you increase the minimum wage to $15, you shouldn't really talk to me. You should talk to some of your businessmen. I mean, they'll tell you what will happen. Obviously, if the cost of anything goes up in our society, you try to use less of it. And if you increase the minimum wage to $15, businesses that hire people in the lower rung there are going to do what they can to find alternatives to hiring more people. So you're going to have less people working, and that's a problem. You know, to me, it's a free country. I think we want more people working not only at $15 an hour, but $30 or $40 or $50 an hour. I wish the Biden administration had canceled the Keystone Pipeline. I mean, there you're looking at jobs in the $80,000 or $100,000 level, and they got rid of those jobs, which I think was really unfortunate because that's where you wish people could wind up. But you know, I've talked to my local businesses, particularly in the hospitality field, light manufacturing, and obviously an emphasis, if you have to pay people $15 an hour, is to see if we can make do with less people.
Congressman, one of the questions that we got in was regarding the COVID relief package of $1.9 trillion. I saw that there was a memo put out about all of these special interest dollars in there. Any idea of where some of those dollars are going, and how do we get that message spread out a little bit further than?
Well, they are giving things. I don't know, they call it special interest dollars, but there are dollars going, for example, to programs abroad, which, given how broke we are, I don't know why we'd have additional money, not only for our country, but for other countries. I think they are going to be giving the vaccine to people who are coming here from abroad, including illegally. Again, I'm getting calls, and maybe you are too, about where can we get the vaccine. It seems a little ridiculous that we're spending money on people trying to come here ahead of local people who are still trying to get the vaccine. So I think that's a mistake. As I mentioned, the amount of money we are giving some local governments is far and away above what they would ask for themselves. If we had a competent press corps in this country, they would be interviewing the county executives or the mayors and saying exactly how much money you need and what are you going to do with it. Instead, they're just throwing money out the window, which is, I think, scandalous, just irresponsible beyond belief.
Another question coming in through the chat is regarding student debt forgiveness. And it looks to be that there's like a proposal of $10,000 of debt forgiveness. And then others are pushing for $50,000 of debt forgiveness. You had mentioned it before about, refinancing, but what about forgiveness?
Well, I think refinancing, we haven't even got that done because they don't think we have money for that. So if we can't refinance, The one thing about forgiveness, and that is one of my major issues, is this out of control student loan debt. I think a lot of the universities sold people a bill of goods, and they don't have the value they thought they had. But I think you've got to remember all the people who have paid their own way, and somebody paid 40 or 50,000 or 70,000 of tuition themselves. How can you look at that person in the eye and say, well, you paid off your debt, somebody else, because they didn't pay it off, the government's going to pay it off for them. I wouldn't mind doing something in that area, and like I said, I'd like to have an interest reduction, but in so many ways we penalize people in our society who are more responsible. And when you have somebody who paid off their debt, and to say, well, now you have to kick in through your tax dollars to pay down somebody else's, is that right?
Thank you for that. Another question through the chat is, what is the status on moving the Butch-Lewis Act forward?
Well, the Butch-Lewis Act is an act to use government money to make whole multi-employer pension plans. A lot of multi-employer pension plans, poorly administered or poorly designed in the first place, are running out of money. On the summaries I have today, that is not in the bill I'm looking at now. I think something is going to have to be done eventually there. I think they have to change the way those pensions are set up in the first place, or we're going to wind up in debt again, because these are private businesses that are not adequately funding their pensions. Some of those businesses have since gone out of business. But I think in order for it to be funded by government dollars, they've got to make sure we don't wind up in the same position 5 or 10 years ago. I know a lot of the Democrats ran on the Butch-Lewis Act, but this is a bill that has to pass. And I guess when bills have to pass, we can see the degree to which they are sincere about really solving the problem. And I don't think it's going to wind up in this bill, but maybe we'll find out. There are going to be changes made in the bill even after we voted out of the budget committee today. It's going to go to another committee tomorrow, and additional things will be added to it. We'll see whether the Butch-Lewis Act is added there. It's the Rules Committee, and we'll see whether it's added there.
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you again very much for your time this morning. We know you have a busy schedule and we have a packed agenda, and it seems like 25 minutes just flies by really quick.
It is. It's hard to believe.
I know. And again, if anybody had any questions and you want to put them in the chat, we will try to get answers to those questions and shoot an email out as a follow-up to this event. Congressman, we have a little less than a minute. Did you have anything that you wanted to leave us with your?
No, if we ever have anybody from the media on board, they should ask the local cities and counties what they're going to do with all this money. And then they could write an interesting article about the degree to which Congress is spending money that they don't have to spend. And that is why you're going to see housing prices and gas prices and food prices shoot up over the next couple of years. Thank you for having me.
Thank you again for all your comments and sharing your time with us this morning. We really appreciate it and hope you have a wonderful day. Enjoy your time over there in DC.
Yep, very good.
Take care. Okay, moving on. Our next speaker we have with us, and I apologize if I pronounce your last name, Ron, incorrectly here. Ron Eidshaug, is that correct?
Yes, you must have Norwegians up there.
Yes, we do. So we have with us Ron Eidshaug. He is currently Vice President of the U.S. Chamber's Congressional and Public Affairs Division, oversees about 15 full-time Capitol Hill lobbyists. And Ron, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and just share with us some of your background and what it is you do over there in DC. And again, what we've done is we've set up the chat space for people to ask questions. you can either start off with giving us just a little bit of background on yourself, and then maybe kind of your thoughts and summary of what's happening in Washington, D.C. that's going to affect us here in Wisconsin. The floor is yours.
Thanks. It's great to be with you. I appreciate that. So I've been at the U.S. Chamber for a little more than 20 years. I work on the lobbying team. The job of the lobbying team is to earn a member of Congress's vote. So we're going to go talk with Congressman Grothman. We're going to go talk with Senator Johnson, whoever else, and make our best case for why they should vote with us. We're going to do that based on data, based on sound science, based on, frankly, what we're hearing from your chamber, the state chamber, chambers across Wisconsin, and chambers across the country. That's why I'm so glad to be here today, because we're in this together. We need to work through these issues together. If you look at where we've had success working on all of these issues, sort of throughout the pandemic, and working together to try and get PPP and that bill done last spring, and we did what we could to help you all and your members sort of learn about PPP and other programs that were out there to sort of help businesses and small businesses weather the pandemic. I think also, if you look at what we did together in terms of creating political space for getting the last big package done just before Christmas, where some of the programs were re-upped, some of the issues were left on the cutting room floor. That's sort of where we're at now. But it's our job in DC at the U.S. Chamber, and it's specifically my job on the lobbying team to help build the consensus for those things. I think we're at an interesting time. We have full Democratic control, but with an asterisk. Nancy Pelosi's majority on the House side is about 5 seats. The Senate is split 50-50. So Kamala Harris is the Democratic majority on the Senate side. There's good news and bad news about that. I think the bad news is that the business community has perhaps less of a voice on priorities than we otherwise would have had, or sort of what we expected to have sort of on election day. The good news is that when majorities are so evenly split, like I said, 5 seats on the House side, Kamala Harris, the vice president on the Senate side, it invites, it fosters, it facilitates bipartisanship. Democrats and Republicans almost always have to work together to get things done because those majorities are so tight. If you look at where the business community has succeeded, it's been from the center out, generally speaking. Generally getting 60, 70, 80 votes in the Senate, 235 votes, those tend to lead to durable long-term policies. If you look at something like Obamacare, if you look at some of the Dodd-Frank legislation during the Obama era, those bills, those laws still remain overwhelmingly controversial, and they were done without a lot of bipartisan cooperation. If you look at some of the things that were done during the Trump era, you have the same sort of partisanship where that controversy hasn't gone away. I think we're also at a time of great dissatisfaction in Washington. All the approval numbers, 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10 Americans think that we're on the wrong track. Congress's approval rating is at 25%. President Biden's approval rating is in the 50% range. That's not great for a honeymoon when you're coming in as a president. So I think there's dissatisfaction, but there's also opportunities to get things done. I think Congressman Grothman did a good job of talking about the coronavirus package. That's sort of dominating where we're at right now. The House and the Senate have gone through this budget reconciliation process. They've done that for obvious reasons. It's easier to get just Democratic votes for something. So in the budget reconciliation process, You only need 218 in the House. You only need 50 or 51 in the Senate. Kamala Harris can make that happen. What we have preached to the administration, to the House and the Senate, is that bipartisanship is better. And exactly for the reasons that I said. Building something durable is probably better. We're sort of in a point where over the next 3 weeks, the rubber really is gonna meet the road on whether there's a nod to bipartisanship in getting things done, or whether there's a turn to just sheer partisanship. We've advocated for a bipartisan relief package. I think Congressman Grothman did a good job of talking about the minimum wage, and that's one of those third rail issues out there. I don't think, the idea of a $15 minimum wage is really a struggle. $15 minimum wage in New York City and Seattle and San Francisco means one thing. On Main Street, Wisconsin, $15 means something completely different. I think we get that. I think there's also recognition that the minimum wage has gone for a long time, and perhaps too long, without an adjustment. That minimum wage, one, should probably be the first number. That second number should be talked about. And I think that there's an opportunity to talk about those kinds of things. Why do I say that we're in this 3-week period? Particularly on the House side, by about March 14th, I think some of the provisions of the December bill expire. Some of the unemployment and those kinds of things expire. So that's the next calendar date for which I think, in particular, the administration, the Democrats in the House, Schumer to some extent, would like to see that next bill done, so that unemployment, some of those other things don't expire. I think I was sort of interested in what Congressman Grothman was saying about state and local relief. I think that there's pretty broad consensus that school districts and some state and local governments across the country could use some more state and local aid. I think that there's a question of what that number looks like. So, balancing what you need and what local governments and school districts need on the one hand is very, very important. And I think that Congressman Grothman brings up a really important point about how much money you just throw out there. So the battle lines, I think, or the areas of controversy are pretty stark. But I think they're also in the realm of getting together. I think it's really important that you all are talking with your members of Congress and giving a forum for them to share what's going on, but also to let them know that you would like to see them, deliver and get something done. I think that's important. Right after the next coronavirus package is dealt with, we hope that Congress and the White House can agree on a big infrastructure bill. We've got the Build by 4th of July campaign, where we would like to see an infrastructure bill get done by then. The House and the Senate have both talked about the idea of getting something done on infrastructure. On the early side, we think that that's really good. I think at the top line, there's broad bipartisan consensus that that infrastructure is something that can and should get done. And I think it's going to be up to us to help push that along. Infrastructure for us is more than roads and bridges. We also need to look at telecommunications. I know that there's a lot of school kids that are at home struggling with less than adequate broadband. That needs to be part of the picture as well. So like I said, we're hoping that's an opportunity for some bipartisan work. And maybe in the question and answer session, we can get into some of those other areas, why bipartisanship is important. But I sort of, before we turn it over to questions, I want to wrap up with sort of the fences and things that Congressman Grothman was talking about. Yeah, it's a travesty that we continue to have fences along the Capitol. Many of you have been to DC. It's really, really cool and fun to be able to walk around the Capitol and the White House and check out the museums and things like that. It's not just cool and fun. It's also important. It's our responsibility to be, and our privilege as Americans to be able to talk with our lawmakers and be able to visit them where they're working and to have honest, open, respectful conversations with members of Congress. What happened on January 6th was not acceptable on any form. People are angry and upset. There's a legitimate and appropriate way for us to share our anger and upset. That wasn't it. And over the next several weeks and months, we're going to need to figure out, we of Americans, of Congress, of the government, of trying to figure out how we're going to be able to keep them safe and do their job. And some of the responsibility is going to be on us to make sure that we are communicating with them. Again, it's really important for us to share our views. It's important for us to share strong views. We need to make sure that we do that in a way, in a civil way, civil discourse, where they understand why we're upset, but also that they're not afraid to meet with us. So yeah, those fences around the Capitol have got to go. We've got to create the space so that they can come down and so that Congressman Grothman can meet you in a couple of months when you do your fly into DC, and we can get back to normal and put the pandemic behind us and get back to a little bit more normal. But Robin and Jamie, I'd love to take some questions and take it from there.
Thank you so much, Ron. And again, to all of our attendees, if you do have any questions for Ron, could you please put it in the chat? And if we don't get a chance to get to all of those questions, Jamie will follow up with an email after the event. Ron, one of the questions, as you were just talking about coming to DC in a couple of months, what do you think are some of the most effective ways for our members, these business leaders that you're talking to here today, to get involved in that decision-making process in Washington? A lot of times you're sitting in Wisconsin and you don't think that any of your actions really have an impact in DC. So what would your advice be to our members that are listening here today?
So number one, I think you're doing the right thing because you're investing in your local Chamber of Commerce. I think one of the things that we've seen over the last several years and has accelerated during the pandemic has been how to share voices together. There's no better groups than local chambers of commerce. There's lots of other groups that you can participate in, and that I'm sure you're participating in. But one of the great things is the platform and the meeting space that you can do in this virtual world. And look, you're getting your members of Congress to show up. So that's really important. I thought that the questions that you were asking were important. So continuing to do that. I think you should also continue to engage with your members of Congress yourself. And I would do that in two different ways. Number one, I talk with their DC office, and I'd ask to talk to the legislative director or the chief of staff when there's a bill that you think is important. I would call them up. Emailing's great. I would talk to a live body. It works a lot better. And then I would also follow that up with a talk with the district staff. What's really, really interesting when you talk to the district staff is, number one, the district staff is going to tell you that you really need to talk to the DC staff on these policy issues. And number two, the district staff is going to call up the DC office and say, I've gotten tons of calls. One call gets magnified into dozens and tons of calls. So as a force multiplier, it's really worth your while to talk to both the DC team and the in-district and in-state teams as well. And why is call better than an email or a tweet or something like that? Because when they give you a line, oh, well, we introduced a bill, yeah, we put out a press release. Well, we don't have a decision quite yet. Well, when you have a decision, I want you to call me back. And then you follow it up with another call. You're demonstrating to them that this just isn't one of the dozens and dozens and dozens of issues that are out there. This is an issue that's important to someone in their community, someone that's signing the front of a paycheck, someone that's providing health care for their workers, someone that's providing economic opportunity for their constituents, and someone that's supporting the local basketball team or hockey team or whatever it is. So you have great opportunities And so those are, I think, the two things that I do. Sorry for the filibuster.
Ron, can I follow that up with one thing? The third call is to your Chamber of Commerce so that we can also make those phone calls as well. If I don't know that it's going on, I can't make that call, and then I can't deploy my other colleagues throughout the state to make calls to the congressional members.
And what Jamie is doing is talking with us in DC too, and with our colleagues in Main Street chambers of commerce across the country, and we're collecting that information and sharing that with congressional leadership and committee leadership and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, sorry for leaving that out.
No worries, no worries. I did want to ask you one question that is brought up to me on a regular basis from our members, and it does deal with the COVID relief package. Any chance of liability protections for businesses, governments, nonprofits being worked into any final deal?
I don't know, and that is going to be a very, very heavy lift. And this is also why elections matter. You know, in December, November, we were thinking that the Republicans were going to control the Senate with a 51 or 52 seats. Liability reform, our big champion was Mitch McConnell and John Cornyn. You know, we had them and many, many other senators on the left and on the right. There were some House members, some Democratic House members that really saw the need for liability relief. So with Republicans not in control, that's not Chuck Schumer's big priority. This is why center out is so important and why it's really important to build a bipartisan approach. Like I said, there are Democrats, particularly on the House side. There was a group of, I don't remember how many, but a couple dozen Democrats on the House side supporting liability relief. It's not a big priority for Chuck Schumer. It's not a big priority for many of the Democratic senators. So we're going to need to work together. It was a heavy lift before. It's a much heavier lift now. I don't foresee a scenario where it's addressed before March 15th. It's one of the ones we're going to continue to push and fight for, and it's one of the ones we're going to have to work together on.
Absolutely, that's one of the areas that is a big concern, and we're also trying to lead that effort at the state level as well. And we've seen that included in some state packages that have not that have been vetoed. So we're still going to fight for it at the state and also out in DC. We're coming up towards the end of your time, Ron. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being such a great partner. Any last thoughts before?
Look, I would just say we're here to help. We're here to support you. You know, it's been really tough getting through the pandemic. Hopefully there's light at the end of the tunnel and things are going to be back to normal within a couple of months. We really appreciate everything that you've done. Your ability to continue to invest in your chamber and keep that chamber going and making sure that you're banding together to get your stuff done is really phenomenally important. We applaud you all, and we look forward to helping out wherever we can as we go forward. And we look forward to seeing you face to face in the not very distant future. So thanks again. We'll see you soon.
Thank you so much, Ron. Appreciate your time, and thanks for the input. Have a wonderful day. Great. So moving right along, our next speaker is Senator Tammy Baldwin. And Jamie, do we have Senator Baldwin?
She should be here any second.
Well, why don't I go over a quick intro while we are waiting for the senator to join us. Senator Tammy Baldwin, as most of you probably know, was born in Madison, Wisconsin. She has served at a local level at the Madison Common Council and the Dane County Board of Supervisors, Wisconsin State Assembly. In 1998, she was elected to Wisconsin's 2nd congressional district, served there for 14 years in the House of Representatives, and was elected to the Senate in 2012, where she remains as our senator, as our representative. She has been a champion of Buy American policies and a strong advocate for Wisconsin's manufacturing and shipbuilding economy. And we are excited to have Senator Tammy Baldwin here with us. Is she here?
Looks like not quite yet, maybe having some minor technical difficulties, but I expect her to be here momentarily. So this is a great opportunity for those of you who have questions, start putting them into the chat. And she's here.
Hello.
Good morning, Senator. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Had a few technical difficulties, but I'm here now.
No problem. Well, we're thrilled to have you with us today. Thank you for joining us. I'm Robin Gruner, and obviously you know Jamie Celine as well. And I just went through your bio for our attendees and wanted to see if you could kick it off for us and maybe just give us a summary of the things that you're working on and the things that you see in the future, and then we'll open it up for some questions. We've asked our attendees to put questions in the chat space, and we'll ask those once we have an opportunity, and then we'll give you a few minutes at the end of your time for some closing thoughts as well, if that's okay with you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I'm thrilled to get a chance to join you, and I know you're doing a lot of legislative outreach, so you've probably already gotten a few updates. I wanted to just start with the COVID-19 status, and then move into the reopening of the PPP program and some breaking news on that in terms of rules that are being implemented. But just starting with COVID-19, obviously we have a light at the end of a long, dark tunnel, and that is the vaccine and the need to make sure that we efficiently deploy that vaccine, get it in arms. And so I just wanted to state my encouragement to all of the business leaders who are on this call that we need your help to ensure that we are stressing the importance still of wearing masks and social distancing and getting a vaccine when it's your turn. Until we have that widespread vaccination, we're going to continue using the tools that we have right now and preparing to work together to combat vaccine hesitancy. And I know that many of you have collaborated on the Stop COVID Spread Coalition. Really appreciate that work, and I suggest that as we prepare for the months ahead, we work to ensure that this messaging effort evolves to address the importance of continued vigilance, getting vaccinated when you can, and combating any COVID vaccine myths that may arise in the community. So again, thank you as business leaders for all your leadership in that regard. So switching to small businesses and PPP, the year-end bill that we passed provides well over a quarter $284 billion to reopen the Paycheck Protection Program for first and second time borrowers. And I know that many of you contributed ideas about how Congress could improve the PPP program. And I took those suggestions, that advice, and worked with my colleagues to secure some changes in the Paycheck Protection Program based on your feedback. The biggest issue I heard about was simplifying the forgiveness process. And we were able to do that particularly for smaller loans. And the other thing that we heard a lot about was the question of tax deductibility. For smaller loans, making the PPP and the EIDL expenses tax deductible. And so we were able to, based on your feedback, get both of these issues addressed in that year-end bill that was passed. I also joined the Small Business committee ranking member, now chair, Ben Cardin, in introducing freestanding legislation to improve the PPP. Much of what we envisioned in that bill was indeed included in the final package. So most notably, the new Paycheck Protection Act program has a second draw loan program for the hardest hit businesses. We've increased PPP access for more organizations and nonprofits, notably. I know that was a big concern. And restaurants, bars, hotels, and other hospitality establishments are able to get higher maximum paycheck protection loans. Finally, the bill sets aside $15 billion for businesses that have fewer than 10 employees, and those in distressed areas are also prioritized. Now, I would caution, and I just want to stress, that it's critically important that the SBA gets the implementation of all of these changes right. So I want to hear from all of you if you're experiencing any problems, so that we can share those with the SBA. And then, you know, if the SBA is unwilling or unable to make changes, that gives us the feedback we need for congressional intervention and oversight to make sure that these laws work as they are intended. I wanted to just take a moment to talk about live venues, because that was a major concern. Live venues were, live event venues were the first to close, and we can, I think, readily predict they will be the last to reopen. So I worked with a bipartisan group of colleagues to push for funding for live venues, and was glad that it was included in that year-end package. It authorizes $15 billion for the SBA to provide grants to independent entertainment businesses. And we have heard some concerns about how the SBA is implementing this, including that the SBA is not allowing those who more recently applied to PPP to take advantage of the live venue grants. So again, your feedback will be very helpful for us to try to resolve some of these issues. Lastly, I just wanted to mention state and local governments. That was something that was left out of the year-end package, despite the clear need. State and local governments have really been footing the bill for spending on first responders, healthcare workers, to address the immediate needs posed by the pandemic. At the same time, income from taxes have declined as economic activity was slowing during the pandemic, creating a real budget squeeze. If state and local governments are forced to lay off workers, our economic recovery is very likely to stall. So we are fighting in this new package to make sure that we can provide a lifeline, really, for local governments until our economy improves. And with that, I want to wrap up my opening comments and take your questions.
Thank you so much, Senator. Appreciate the opening comments. Jamie, did you want to take any of the questions that we have gotten?
Yeah, so far we have a question about the Buy America work that you've done. So the question is, what is your opinion on President Biden is reopening trade with China, and how does that affect the Buy America?
Well, I think we'll see that the Biden administration is taking a different approach to some of the trade issues. The tool that was used in the previous administration was a lot of tariffs that then created a sort of retaliatory tariff set of issues. And what I think in terms of Buy America is that we need to, especially when we look at the government's role, we need to prioritize domestic manufacture when we're spending taxpayer dollars. So I want to see us be good stewards of taxpayer dollars in our procurement, in our contracting, et cetera, and make sure that we learn lessons that this pandemic has taught us, which is when we fail to have a manufacturing base that provides what we need to keep ourselves safe, that we suffer. The early shortages of personal protective equipment like N95 masks, like paper gowns and gloves and things that first responders and healthcare, frontline healthcare workers need, and the testing kits, the reagents, the swabs. We don't manufacture a lot of that here in the US, and we really paid the price when there's a global pandemic and everybody is bidding against each other globally, but also because it wasn't a centralized response from the federal government, we had, you know, a police department and a paramedic unit bidding against each other in places across this country. Hospitals and other entities were bidding literally against their competitors or their neighbors for needed supplies. In Wisconsin, particularly with our robust paper industry, I would have liked to have seen quicker retooling so that we could supply our own needs. And that's why I'm pleased that the Biden administration is unleashing the full potential of of what we call the Defense Production Act, that allows us to provide incentives to retool some of our manufacturing in order to supply the things that we need to keep our country safe. In this case, we're talking about a pandemic, but one of the, there's other things that are essential to our national security that we can use the same, focus. That said, I think that what we're learning, and when I go forward with Buy America, one of the things I'm working with the administration on is closing as many of the loopholes that exist. All Buy America policies include waivers, but it's very opaque when an administration grants waivers. And sometimes the waivers become so extensive that it takes the meaning out of the Buy America policies to begin with. And so we're trying to make these things more transparent, and also to empower organizations like MEP, the Manufacturing Extension Program, to have visibility on what we're not producing here, so that they can work with regional companies to allow us to, manufacture things to meet our own needs. So those are some of the things we're doing moving forward, and I've been very pleased with what the Biden administration has done via executive order, but there is legislation that will also need to follow on.
Great summary. Thank you, Senator. As you mentioned, we're looking to those of you in DC representing us to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars. And as you know, the Fox Cities has an unemployment rate of under 4%. And many of our members have expressed concern about some of these additional stimulus payments because it could potentially result in people not showing up to work. And with over 6,000 unduplicated job openings here in our area, many of which don't require formal credentials, what are your thoughts on ways that we as a business community can encourage people to get into the workforce instead of potentially relying on some of those stimulus payments?
Well, in terms of the unemployment programs, employment is still a big challenge regionally. across the United States and in parts of Wisconsin. And I'm glad to hear that the Fox Valley is experiencing under 4%. We want it to be 0% if we can. That's what we're working forward to. But in terms of the issue of the unemployment insurance, I just want to stress that the rules for receiving unemployment prohibit folks from continuing on it if they have a valid offer of employment. So say they were laid off and now the business is restaffing and building back their staff. If you refuse a valid offer of employment, that does break the rules. And so there should not be incentive to continue on unemployment when a valid offer is provided. So I always wanted to stress that the pandemic supplemental benefit for unemployment is to recognize that there are some still who, you know, I was commenting in the opening comments, say live event venues. They're not back at work, right? And I think we wanted to recognize that that would be the case still for some, but again, the rules need to be respected, and people are not eligible to remain on unemployment if they have a valid offer of employment. So I think I got at that, but yeah.
Senator, one of the questions that we have a couple questions in the chat for you.
Okay.
This one regarding meat processing crisis. So I'll just read it to you. Our meat processing crisis is restricting our regional and local food economies to grow and meet consumer demand. How do we remove regulatory barriers that force smaller and mid-sized packing plants out of business? What do you see happening on the federal or state level to resolve this problem?
It's a really great question, and one that I'm hearing a lot more discussion about. The fact is that there's the regulations that exist for the smaller state meat packing and processing industry. Anybody who the expectations are nearly identical to the expectations at the ones that are nationally regulated, and therefore. We should diversify, and we have a near monopoly among the large processors. And this has shown us, especially early on in the pandemic, you know, the issues with near monopolies, right? And so I have talked already with the nominee to be our Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack. He's probably going to get a vote on confirmation this week, so soon to be secretary, I think. And we actually talked a lot about this issue, and he shares my interest, and it sounds like the interest of the person who wrote out the question of really bolstering the smaller local meat processing industry, and making sure that we're not, again, in this situation where, you know, a closure of one of the big plants creates havoc for producers and consumers. We don't want to be in that position again. It was a crisis when it happened. And so I see a lot of openness to that, and should be in a good position now. As I got my committee assignments, and I'm now the chair of the Agriculture Appropriations Subcommittee in the Appropriations Committee. So I'll be in a perch where we can really push this issue and have, I think, good oversight in terms of moving it forward.
Thank you for that. You know how important food production is in the state of Wisconsin, and making sure that our craft producers, our small and medium-sized producers are doing very well. Another question for you from the chat is, do you know if the National Parks new funding of $1.9 billion will be canceled, seeing as though the funding was going to come from the oil industry, and now the industry took a hit with the Keystone Pipeline?
I will have to follow up on that specific question. I have not heard anything specifically on that a particular allotment of or allocation of money, but I'm going to have staff follow up with you, and you can get the answer to the questioner.
Great, thank you. I have my own question. So we hear a lot about how things aren't great in DC and how no one wants to work together. What are some of the things that we can see the Democrats and Republicans getting together on and moving forward? What are the positive stories that we're all thirsty for?
Well, I love that question. So I know this is going to sound hard to believe, but we actually do a lot more bipartisan work than ever gets reported. It is perhaps the tendency of the evening news, whether it's local or the cable networks, to focus in on the tensions, the drama, but we work together all the time. And often what happens is, we introduce, we work together on issues that maybe affect regions or interests that particular senators have. And then the product of our work gets incorporated in larger pieces of legislation. And yet the groundwork for inclusion happened because we work together. So let me give you a couple of examples. I was just talking about the improvements made to the PPP program in its second round. One of the issues that I worked on gets back to the previous question about meat processing, but one of the issues that I worked across the aisle on was how family-owned small farms were almost completely excluded from the PPP program in its first round. Why? Well, in a state like Wisconsin with dairy, the loan size is based on net profits from the prior year or payroll. Okay, so think of how dairy has been doing recently. I worked with one dairy farm couple who qualified for an $80 PPP loan. 80. That's not going to do much, right? That's because they had net loss of revenue the year before. So Senator Thune and I, he's from South Dakota, worked on legislation. First, it was freestanding legislation that would allow farmers in this situation to use their gross revenues from the prior year, not net revenues. And that was ultimately incorporated in the year-end package that I was describing. And that's making a world of difference to farmers in Wisconsin and across the country. But that's just a great example of both of us having an interest in making sure that family farms weren't being ignored in small business relief, and working together across the aisle. Our bill didn't pass, but it was incorporated in the bigger bill, and just a great example of bipartisan legislation.
That's a great example. Great example. Something we've already talked about, discussed a little bit this morning, is the proposals for increasing the federal minimum wage. Obviously, we have a lot of employers, a lot of small employers that are very concerned about that and how they're going to not only get through a pandemic, but also now have to pay employees, and they're not paying minimum wage now. They're paying above minimum wage, but the $15 is probably still above that for some of them. What are your thoughts on that, and how do we how do we adequately compensate each other or compensate employees, but not set a whole federal minimum wage?
Yeah, well, I will just not dance around it and say I do support a federal minimum wage and increasing it. It's been many, many years since we addressed the federal minimum wage. In the meantime, we've seen many localities and states do it. And I think there's a good reason for there to be a federal minimum wage. The question, of course, is what should it be? And, should there be regional variances and all of those questions that get, that clearly have an impact, because the federal minimum wage has really been a one size fits all. But here's some of the principles that I would think about. There's first the question of, do you support there being a federal minimum wage? And I do. And then the question is, how frequently should it be adjusted? And when is the time? We've ignored it. We've tried, but we've ignored it for a long time. We should have, I think, a long time ago, really indexed it in a way that it automatically adjusts, so that it's not a big swing all at once. But we have some catch-up work to do. The other principle that is important to me is that anybody who works full-time should not have to be dependent upon government programs to make ends meet. Whether that's food stamps or, any other sort of supplemental program. And right now, that's just not the case for too many workers. That the federal minimum wage is set at a point that you can very well be in poverty even after working full time. And many people, have multiple jobs as well as family responsibilities. And of course, in a pandemic, the kids are often at home instead of at school. And so that has real impacts. And I just believe so strongly in the dignity of work, and that if you work full time, you work hard, you're good at it, you should make enough to be above the poverty line. And that's where the $15 comes in. And so, I suspect, now that's philosophy. Now let's talk brass tacks. It's been proposed in the COVID relief bill that's underway, that the mechanism that is, legislative mechanism is one called reconciliation, whereby you do not need to have the usual 60 votes to pass something in the US Senate. And it is using that to pass legislation restricts the content of the legislation. And right now there's a real debate going on of whether you can put a measure to increase the federal minimum wage in a reconciliation package. That question has not yet been answered. So we'll see. If not, if it can't be a part of reconciliation, then there'll be a freestanding debate on it. And, we'll need to get 60 votes in the Senate. If it is part of the package, I do think that there would be an effort to raise it in stages, not in one fell swoop.
Senator, thank you so much for all of your answers and your transparency and especially your time here this morning with us.
Hi to Mike Gallagher. I just saw him. He must be next.
Yeah, he's next. But
hello. How are you?
I did want to give you another moment. If you had any additional closing thoughts you wanted to make sure to share with our participants, and also if there are any additional questions in the chat that we didn't get a chance to address with you, we will make sure to get those to your office and get some feedback back to our attendees. So if you just want to take a minute with any closing thoughts, and then we'll move on to our next speaker. Thank you.
I'll be lighthearted. We were talking about the meat packing industry, and I know that we always have to educate our colleagues about the big industries of our state. And so all I want to say is there's a reason why they're called the Green Bay Packers. We have a long history. And as soon as I mentioned that to my colleagues from out of state, it was like, oh, okay, of course Wisconsin's big in the meatpacking industry. So regardless, we're very proud of making things in Wisconsin. We make things, we grow things, and that manufacturing economy is key to the identity of who we are, that and our work ethic. So that's why we're called Badgers too. It has to do with the work ethic. If you ever research the story, it's not because we have an abundance of badgers running around the state, but those hardworking miners in the turn of, I can't say the turn of the last century, the century before, they were nicknamed Badgers because they'd emerge from the mines and look kind of a little disheveled like a badger. Hard work.
Well, great. Two great stories to end us with here. So thank you again for your time, Senator. We sincerely appreciate it, and we'll follow up with any additional questions.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too.
Okay, and we're going to step right into our final speaker today. As you can see here on the screen, who has joined us, Congressman Mike Gallagher. Good morning, Congressman. Real quick, he represents us in Wisconsin's 8th District in the U.S. House of Representatives. He formerly served in the United States Marine Corps for 7 years, deployed twice to Iraq. Currently serves as co-chair of Cyberspace Solarium Commission and the House Armed Services and Transportation and Infrastructure Committees. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us this morning. What we've asked our speakers to do is just kind of give a quick summary of some of the hot issues that you're dealing with there in DC. And as you're speaking, we've opened up our chat for some of our attendees to ask some questions. So once you give your summary, we'll open that up to some of that Q&A, and then we'll give you some time at the end to wrap things up. So thank you very much for joining us, and good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me with you. And let me say, I emphatically agree with what the senator said at the end there, that, Wisconsin's superpower, our secret sauce is really our work ethic. I might add to it, I think a sense of community and strong communities and a desire to sort of solve problems at the local level and take care of each other. And obviously that's come through in the last year, just in this really unprecedented crisis. And, I think you can look at it through different lenses. I mean, one would be a purely pessimistic lens, and certainly there are stories that are incredibly sad, both in terms of personal lives lost, businesses destroyed, et cetera. But through a different lens, and certainly something I've seen in the last year, you can't help but be blown away by all the ways in which Wisconsinites have stepped up and innovated and found ways to survive in this crisis. And while certainly, the federal government didn't do everything perfectly, you could also look at it through a different lens and say the federal government took historically aggressive action, whether it was through the development of the vaccine or some of the bills that were passed. So where does that leave us a year into this? Well, I choose to look at the glass as it's half full and believe that the light is at the end of the tunnel, and just the ways in which Wisconsin hospitals have stepped up to fix our distribution problems, the fact that the vaccine is getting out there, I hope will give people confidence that we can go back to our lives. I think we've long passed the point where we can do things like open up schools and give working class families somewhere to send their kids during the day. I'm concerned about that more than anything else, just because I think it's going to be hard to measure the cost of another year lost for our kids. And I can't help but think, I think it's obvious logic would tell you that the kids that are going to suffer the most were the ones that were already struggling prior to the pandemic, right? Working class kids, the 60% of Wisconsin kids who can't read at grade level. I mean, that to me is something we're going to be having to spend a lot of time fixing over the next decade, really, because from the chamber's perspective, I would imagine a lot of what you talk about day to day is workforce issues, right? It's how do we get those 18-year-olds who are coming out of Green Bay Public Schools or doing a year at NWTC, how do we get them in the workforce, and how do we help our businesses, small, medium, and otherwise, solve their workforce challenges? That was our biggest problem economically prior to the pandemic. It's still our biggest problem right now. And so we're going to have to kind of get everyone on the same page in terms of aggressively working to fix that. So that's sort of a bigger point. immediately in Congress, as I look at the landscape over the next 2 years, maybe this is where I sort of step off the optimistic train and just got to tell you some hard realities. I'm worried that it's just going to be two big budget reconciliation bills that will go forward purely on partisan lines. I'm sure the senator provided some insight into this latest round of coronavirus relief, and I'm sure we disagree about sort of the value of some of the provisions, but it seems like that bill is going to go forward over the next 3 weeks. It'll be about $2 trillion in new spending, some of which may be warranted. By the way, I think all of us are on board with enhanced resources to turbocharge vaccine distribution, allow hospitals to cover the costs, the additional costs they're shouldering because of coronavirus, and certainly in areas where the economy remains shut down because of government fiat, help those small businesses and employees who are struggling and literally want to work but aren't allowed to in many cases. So I just think I think you could get a lot of Republicans on board for that more narrow, targeted approach. But, if you look at some of the provisions in this bill, there's a lot of extraneous stuff in it. I won't get into the politics of it, but it's going to go forward on a purely partisan line. I don't think some of the more controversial elements, like a $15 minimum wage, will be in there because I don't think they can get Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema to stay on board if that's the case. So big picture, you'll have this huge $2 trillion bill moving. You'll have another round of budget reconciliation a little bit later in this Congress that they could use to get things through without having to get 60 votes in the Senate. But I think, and I understand the sense of urgency. I think the strategic and legislative blunder may be that, for passing another $2 trillion when $500 billion hasn't been spent in the last bill, it's really going to make it hard to make the case for a bipartisan infrastructure bill going forward, just because we're going to be so budget constrained. It's going to make it hard to continue the bipartisan work we've done on defense spending going forward. And I'm worried, in other words, that it's going to crowd out all these other priorities that we have that are important not only for the defense of the country, but are important for Northeast Wisconsin, right? Where, we're building ships in Marinette. We had a huge win that's going to reverberate economically for decades to come. We obviously have profound infrastructure needs with 41 lane expansion, the Southern Bridge into Pier, et cetera, that we're at some point when we get all our ducks in a row at the state level. A lot of you are going to come to me at the federal level and say, okay, we need federal grants for X, Y, Z, and we just want to make sure we're ready to do that at that point. So all of that is to say, just to be completely honest with you, this is probably going to be a little bit more partisan than I would have hoped coming out of the election. But hope springs eternal. And I will say this, you just had the senator on, and obviously we disagree on a lot. We come from different ideological perspectives, but I think the Wisconsin delegation is unique, is that when push comes to shove for things that are really important for Wisconsin, we have a really good track record of working together and putting aside some of the partisan stuff in order to do what's right for the state, even where we don't agree 100%. That's certainly been my experience the last 4 years. It's been my experience in working with the senator for the shipyard up there. And so, that continues to give me hope. And then I would say there's a lot of new, younger members of Congress that really have different backgrounds and perspectives, a lot from the private sector, a lot from the military. And that's, notwithstanding some of the craziness we saw over the last month, that's created a different environment where people are hungry to kind of bring some common sense back to the institution. Some of the more, so that was, I started kind of big picture, immediate legislative things going on, and maybe we can zoom back out and I'll give you my ultimate optimistic argument going forward. I mean, look at the big trends during this terrible pandemic, right? Look at what's happening. Well, I think if you just dispassionately evaluate the data, some things become obvious. I mean, people are moving with their feet in many cases, right? I mean, there are people leaving, particularly crowded urban areas, whether it's Manhattan or LA or Chicago, right? This is really, and and I think a second big thing, which is related to that, is that virtual work from home, hybrid working model that's here to stay, right? I was reading some analysis that suggests for a lot of bigger size companies, they're going to downsize their corporate and headquarter footprint by 50 to 70% going forward, right? And I think maybe, and this is the most obvious, people now have a renewed appreciation for our health, right? Both in terms of living in a place that's healthy, and also having access to world-class hospitals and healthcare system. All of that, in my mind, should set up Wisconsin in general and Northeast Wisconsin in particular for a lot of long-term success. In other words, if we get a few things right, I think we could be the destination of choice for not only our homegrown talent, who in some cases we send them to the UW system and then they go elsewhere, not only for snowbirds at the end of life that become Florida residents and we lose out on that tax revenue, but also for, the most talented and hardworking people around the country that are looking for other places to live. I get that it's cold here in Wisconsin, but we have a lot of really powerful things going for us. Foremost, our culture of hard work. But if we really focused on turning Wisconsin into a K through 14 superpower, simplifying our tax code so it made economic sense for businesses and for individuals to move here, while maintaining that culture of community and hard work, man, I think we could be the best state in the union. Why not? Like, it's within our power, right? Pick your metric, whether it's top educational outcomes or community safety or firm formation, business development. Like, let's agree on a set of metrics, and our goal should be to make Wisconsin number one in all those. Why not? Other states are figuring it out. Like, this is a competition. It's a competition for talent, and it's not just a national one. It's an international one right now. So I just wanted to diatribe. Those are my thoughts, and we can talk about anything you want to talk about.
Congressman, thank you so much. It's amazing how quickly time goes when we have speakers with some great ideas and great information to share. So we only have about 3 minutes left here in our session.
I filibuster.
What's that?
See? I filibuster. I may not be a senator, but I've learned how to filibuster. So.
Well, if there are any questions, we will capture them in the chat, and we will make sure to get those into your office for answers. But real quickly, one of the questions that we get from our members, from the chamber members, the biggest concerns that they're experiencing is potential lawsuits related to COVID. So do you see anything on the federal government side taking action to provide protection to businesses who follow state and federal guidelines from COVID against frivolous lawsuits? If you could just take that for a minute, that would be helpful.
Short answer is no, and that's a tragedy, because in the last round of coronavirus relief, it seemed to me that the foundation for a bipartisan deal was, liability protection in return for targeted assistance, and that just quickly fell by the wayside. It got politicized, and it is admittedly difficult legislatively to construct the liability protection in a way that doesn't have unintended consequences, but we were close to getting there. And there was a construct in the Senate that made sense to me, but for whatever reason, and I still don't know why, it just got abandoned, and we're not even considering it really in this round, because again, it's going in a partisan direction. So no. And that's wrong. We should absolutely do that.
Well, a short answer is a good answer when we have limited amount of time, unfortunately. So I just want to say thank you, Congressman, so much for being here with us this morning. We really do appreciate your time on behalf of AT&T as a sponsor, and I'm sure as Jamie will say, on behalf of the chamber and all of our members. Thank you for being here. If we do get any questions, we'll definitely make sure that we send them your way to get answered. Jamie, did you have some additional comments you wanted to make?
No, I just want to thank both Congressman Gallagher and Robin and AT&T for today's event, and all our other presenters. And just to remind folks that this is number one of a 4-part series, and the second part is the CEO of the city on May 11th, and more information is going to come out about that, where we're going to have Mayors Penterman, Coffert, Woodford, and Merkus all speak and talk about what's going on locally. So thank you, everyone, for all of your time and attention.
Can I say thank you? And I want to end on a lighthearted note as well, since the senator did. I recently went into my attic and I got all my old NBA trading cards, because I'm going to give them to my nephew and ask him to figure out how to sell them as like a lesson in entrepreneurship. And I think I got some value, but I mean, I was obsessed with basketball growing up. And I found in the process my old laminated Dream Team poster that now is hanging behind me in my office here. And I did a TV interview yesterday where I had that, and I got a lot of comments of, is he 14 years old? Why does he have a Dream Team poster? So that's my lighthearted story for the day.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Congressman. Appreciate you.
Have a good one.
All right. Take care, everyone. Thank you.